hands. Thank you. I love that. You all are troopers because you have stayed to the end. So come on in all the way down to the front. It's not school. I won't call on you. However, when I announce the raffle prizes, I'm going to whisper and only say it to the people in the front rows. So if you're in the back, you're just going to lose out. All righty, let's get going on this last part. I've had a full bottle of Diet Coke. I've had some Disney cookies. My energy is up. I hope yours is as well because it has really been a fantastic day. That's right. Woo! From the power of vehicle technology, alternative delivery, mileage-based user fees, new last-mile options, and more, today's summit has sparked critical discussions, some of which I still hear going on, to help make California more competitive and, once again, the best place to live, work, and play. A couple of announcements before we get into the thick of things. Of course, a couple more elected officials that I've saved to the end to make sure I've introduced. Ed Graham, Councilman, City of Chino Hills. And I'm very proud for many of you who listen to what I say and have told me and several others that I mispronounced someone's name earlier. And so I offer my sincere apologies to Mr. Jess Talamantes, Vice Mayor of the City of Burbank. I am so sorry, but I blame it entirely on Hassan. I could have sworn he said Jessica. But we're very glad you're with us today. So a big round of applause to all of our elected officials, and in particular to Mr. Talamantes. Excellent. Now, one last thing. When I sent you off, you were sent off with an action item to tweet and post, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, however it is you do to get messages out through social media to your legislators to tell them to take action in the special session. How many people did that? I know some of you did because I saw it on Facebook. Excellent. Good for you. But I'm going to tell you to do it again. Either use that message, fix our roads, do it now, or use your own personal message. We want you to be like that reporter on the Segway that took out Usain Bolt. We want you crashing into those legislators. You tell them we need them to pay attention and we need them to do something about our roads and make the money available for what we need for transportation, right? Right. Fix our roads, do it now, hashtag special session, hashtag mobility 21. I hope I never do that again in my life. Hashtag. Okay, now then, on to the serious business at hand. I would like to thank again today's titanium sponsor, Parsons, and I would also like to thank this afternoon's closing, I'm faster than the screen. I'd also like to thank this afternoon's closing session sponsor, Cordoba Corporation, for making this program session possible. Big round of applause for our two sponsors. We are so excited to showcase for the first time at the Mobility 21 Summit an amazing cast of federal, agency, and private sector, maritime, and goods movement leaders for our closing session. Here to introduce our distinguished moderator is George Pla, President of Cordoba Corporation and the closing session sponsor. George?
Thank you, everybody. It's my honor to be a sponsor of the closing session. I have the distinct honor to introduce Lucy Dunn, the moderator for our closing session. I have about 15 pages to talk about Lucy Dunn, but I want to tell you something. If you own a business or work in Orange County and you're not a member of OCBC, then you have major issues with Lucy. If you are in transportation in California and you don't know who Lucy Dunn is, you have bigger issues if you don't know who she is. So it's my honor to introduce to you the incomparable Lucy Dunn, someone that we're crazy in love with. Lucy Dunn, thank you.
I love all this music. It's like the best exercise ever. We should sort of do an Ellen DeGeneres thing, don't you think? And all just sort of stand up at the same time and start dancing to music. All right, this is a great panel. We have the ports, goods moving in our future, a candid conversation with the port CEOs and leading public and private sector leaders on the critical importance of goods movement and the balancing business and community needs. I couldn't get a better group of folks. Why don't we bring them on out so they can come and have a seat? We haven't scripted this. Hold on. I don't know what they're expecting me to do. Hold on. Come on, you guys. Come on out. Come on out. This way I can kind of introduce them while they're all getting settled in their seats, and then we can start with the questions. So at the far end, we all know Hassan Ekrada, Executive Director, Southern California Association of Governments and board member of Mobility 21. He is crazy smart. I've told him that all day today. Every panel he's been on has just been a revelation. He has nearly 30 years of public and private sector experience in transportation planning in Southern California. He has worked for LA County Metropolitan Transportation Authority, South Coast Air Quality Management District, and he also worked abroad for the USSR government, Moscow Metro Corporation, we like to say Moscow Central Planning. Hassan Ekrada, welcome. Welcome, yes. Also joining us is Gene Soroka, Executive Director of the Port of Los Angeles. As Executive Director of the busiest container port in North America, Mr. Soroka is responsible for managing a $939 million budget, leading a team of more than 900 employees, and his duties involve interacting with a wide range of stakeholders, including port customers worldwide, supply chain partners, labor, community members, and elected and appointed officials at all levels. Please welcome Gene Soroka. Thank you, Gene. Thank you. We also have Michael Christensen, Senior Executive for Supply Chain Optimization for the Port of Long Beach. He reports directly to the CEO, John Slagerup, named to the newly created position in February 2015. He has more than 40 years of both public and private sector experience, working collaboratively with industry stakeholders to find new ways to increase communication and cooperation among the links of the supply chain to enhance cargo flow. No leaks, links. He also used to work with Parsons Transportation Group, Nolte & Associates, and Southern Pacific Railroad. So wonderful public-private expertise in Michael Christensen. Welcome. Welcome, Michael. And we have John Corley, Vice President of Global Ports and Harbors Director, Parsons. He has over 27 years of experience with an emphasis in the ports and maritime field, managing global business development efforts across multiple markets and regions. He has assisted clients in the sale or acquisition of marine terminals, developing the business cases for greenfield container terminals and major port expansion projects, assisted clients in securing funding for capital improvements, and served as the principal in charge for major container terminal development projects. Would you welcome John Corley? Thank you, John, for joining us. Kristen Dacos, Executive Director, Port of Hueneme, and Advisory Board member of Mobility 21, is a proven leader in her field. She served as CEO and Port Director for the Port of New Bedford, Massachusetts, the nation's #1 value fishing port. That's awesome. In addition, she was a high-profile appointee to the U.S. Department of Transportation, by the U.S. Department of Transportation to both the National Freight Advisory Committee and the U.S. Marine Transportation System National Advisory Council. She is the chair of the American Association of Port Authorities, a trade association representing more than 130 public port authorities in the U.S., Canada, the Caribbean, Latin America. And she was elected as chair for the 2014-2015 activity year. Would you welcome Kristen? Kristen, thank you for joining us. And we're gonna keep an empty chair here just in case the amazing representative of the United States House of Representatives and chair of the Congressional Safe Climate Caucus, the Honorable Alan Lowenthal, makes it back to our stage here. As we all know, he's been a two-decade tenure as a public official, city council member, California legislator, and he had a very important role always in trying to manage both environmental protections and economic success at the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles, saying that they were not mutually exclusive. His landmark environmental legislative efforts helped lead the two adjacent ports becoming the cleanest and greenest ports in the world, while remaining the busiest and most successful container ports in the Western Hemisphere. That green business model, advocated by Congressman Lowenthal, instituted by the two ports, has become a role model for ports throughout the world. So when the congressman shows up, we're never going to say a word. We're just going to let him slip into a chair somewhere here and join our panel discussion. So let's start right out, shall we, ladies and gentlemen, okay? First, right off, we had a lot of the news of the ports this year with, in fact, I marveled flying in from Sacramento on my Southwest flight and literally counting the ships that were just waiting to drop off their goods at the ports of LA Long Beach. It was fascinating. It was, in many cases, more than 30. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Congressman Alan Lowenthal. We've given you a brilliant introduction. I just want you to be assured. Thank you. So, Mr. Soroka and Christensen, why don't you share a little bit about what happened at the ports earlier this year with the high levels of congestion and delay, and what are the ports doing about it now? Just jump right in.
Yeah, it was a confluence of events that started really before pre-recession days. Debilitating financial results in a maritime shipping industry that plummeted to all-time lows. The creation and need for lower costing throughout their networks, thus resulting in buying larger ships, partnering with other competitors to try to rationalize capital equipment expenditure, then calling terminals on the west coast of the United States that were built 2 decades ago for ships a third the size that are calling today. Add on top of that the divestiture of chassis, or those trailers that move the containers, over our roadways by the steamship lines a couple years ago, and cargo that's now being dispersed over a wider array of terminals in Southern California, impacting the Western railroads on how quickly they could build their unit trains for delivery of product to the interior, overlaid with a protracted and long labor negotiation between the Pacific Maritime Association and our longshoremen and women, created what we saw. So it wasn't just a Port of LA Long Beach phenomenon. Most of the ports, major standing in the east-west trades around the world, are faced with the very same issue. More cargo coming in at one snapshot in time, data elements that are all about us, but not collated to the point where we can use them for predictability and forecasting. So there's a tremendous amount of work that the industry has to do, and that the ports of LA and Long Beach are leading today. Back in February, shortly after the tentative agreement was reached between longshore labor and the PMA, the Federal Maritime Commission unanimously voted in favor of extending a decades-long talking agreement between the ports of Long Beach and LA to discuss everything in the supply chain with the exception of terms and price. Since then, we've had public meetings, working groups, and task force created to get at these issues that can be managed today and those which need some thoughtful planning for the future. We've also introduced technology to the ports. There's a company right up the road in Venice, California called Cargomatic, which has developed an Uber-like trucking system in the less than container load market and now has extrapolated that to full container loads. They're using a GPS platform overlaid with algorithmic formulas to call on the capacity of our trucking industry for first available containers. The neat thing about this technology is that once the trucker delivers that container to the customer's door, they get paid right online. Never been done before. We've also brought in a company called Quick 180, which is creating a virtual container terminal outside of the port property, which will lessen the amount of gate turns on useless, empty equipment movements, and also further reducing emissions by matching up importers with exporters. The US DOT has brought in their Freight Advance system, which pings the terminal operator and creates route optimization tools that we haven't seen before either. In addition, we've also gotten with those chassis providers that had difficulty, and for the first time ever created a gray or interoperable chassis pool in Southern California, where nearly 85% of all available chassis in the 5-county area are now under that interoperable pool. In the first 7 weeks of operation since May 1st, we saw a 30% increase in efficiencies and the removal of hundreds and hundreds of empty reposition moves of chassis, therefore reducing useless emissions on that repo cost and time spent inside the harbor. So there's still a lot more work to do, but we've gotten great support from our elected officials. Assemblyman Frazier is here today, the chair of our Transportation Committee, who is leading the charge in all areas of the port cooperation, including our efficiencies and terminal velocity plans, in addition to looking for how better we can use capital to advance our processes here. And Alan, to my right, has been a long-standing supporter of the port, along with Janice Hahn, our Congresswoman from San Pedro. So we feel very confident that we've got people that are looking out after us, in addition to the great strategies and tactics that we're implementing today.
Fantastic. Mr. Christensen.
Yeah, Lucy, and I appreciate what Gene is saying, and we totally agree with his characterization of the issue. The rate of change, and some folks in the industry are indicating that the rate of change in our industry rivals that brought on containerization 50 years ago. Mm-hmm. It is an immense and accelerating change that has come to us that we're dealing with. As Gene had mentioned, when the FMC, the Federal Maritime Commission, approved our joint port initiative, that opened a whole new era for joint port cooperation. And as we sit here today, we're about 24 working session meetings into this effort. And it's truly remarkable what has happened as part of this process. We have elements of every part of the supply chain that are finally sitting around the same table, bringing these issues up and brainstorming solutions. And we've already seen benefits that have come out of that. And we expect to see this happen continuously over the next months and years as we do this. We appreciate the help of so many people, and again, to second a fantastic week with our legislators, with Congressman Lowenthal's support from Washington, and in Sacramento, a lot of interest and a lot of interaction as well, to see what can be done to align policy as we move forward with this effort to optimize our supply chain. So we see a lot of work ahead of us, but we also see everything in place to make this successful.
Fantastic. Hassan, with that backup at the ports, do you have a sense of how that impacted the Southern California economy, let alone the nation's economy?
Lucy, it did impact the economy a great deal. As a matter of fact, just in general, 1/3 of the region's economy is related to the trade that happened at the ports. The chair of our Assembly Transportation is here, Mr. Frazier. Monday I was in his committee. I said, and I say again, this is important for the nation, important for California, and important for Southern California. And as we move forward, we should not be shy about saying very clearly that we need to invest in infrastructure in the ports and outside the ports, because any disruption would lead to economic disbenefits. Any disruption. I was on a panel earlier today. One of my colleagues on the panel said we should invest in everything but stop investing in highways. That's totally wrong. Not only our people is going to continue to use the highways, but our goods movement depend on the infrastructure of the highways. And this is not me talking. There is very well-known, unbiased, independent economists throughout Southern California that led by the OCBC, Dr. Ward Wallace, that put a report out, actually documented the kind of jobs that are related to goods movement. So we cannot afford disruption. I appreciate what Gene and Mike said. We cannot afford any disruption, frankly. We talk about the challenges we have in the region. 1 in 4 children living in poverty. The best proven way to get people out of poverty is to create economic opportunities. The ports can offer that economic opportunities. And that disruption, Lucy, we're talking about, did make some economic benefits, not only regionally, but nationally.
Very good, thank you. Gentlemen, did you notice any permanent loss of cargo? Or was there cargo diversion that we're not going to get back as a result of what happened?
Absolutely. Since 2002, during the unfortunate lockout of longshore labor by the PMA, dating until today, the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach have lost 20% of their market share.
Wow.
The cargo won't come back.
Wow.
When you have 3, 4, and 5 smaller ports nipping at your heels, that starts to get a little dangerous. The advent of the two-way passage in the Suez Canal is bringing more and more cargo to the east coast of the United States. The battleground in the Midwest, draw a line from Chicago through Columbus down to Dallas, is what's at stake today. I think with a little different look at how we want to do business, that hybrid model that I've been talking about in public, where we have brought together what I consider to be a high-performance team of industry experts that can speak in the same language as the supply chain folks that we deal with every day in order to earn that cargo back. But it is going to be a huge lift. And these are areas of efficiency, cost, and most importantly, trust, that we won't have another nodal effect of the supply chain fall down on us like we saw during the winter months of 2014 and 15.
Very good.
Lucy, just
Yes.
to highlight this point, to add to what Gene just said. So let us say there is obviously an impact, but the more this happens and the more other ports in the United States and other ports in the world are eager to compete with us, the more we're going to lose. Predictability is important for business. So these disruptions, while there is an impact, their impact is actually much longer term as these other airports become equipped to do more as the Panama Canal expands, et cetera.
And so I'd like you also answer the question, Mr. Christensen, as well, but also factor in, tell us a little bit about the Panama Canal. We've heard a lot about that and their expansion there for new capacity, new ships. So factor that as well into this cargo diversion issue we're having.
Sure, Lucy, and I agree with Gene. There's been some substantial diversion that has occurred over the past years. And I think it's correct that the challenge is squarely before us right now to enhance the efficiency of the goods movement through the gateway. Thus, our efforts that are considerable and will be sustained until we accomplish that. But it quite simply is a matter of velocity and reliability. And we need to prove that to the shippers, to the beneficial cargo owners, the people who pay the bills, and see how that works. Now, we've had some improvements. We've got a ways to go. Long Beach put an all-time record through our port in July, but this is another month in August, and we're just now coming into the peak. So we've got our hands full. We've got our work cut out for us. In terms of Panama, as you know, the canal will go in service next year. We believe that the impact will be minor. One of the real interesting facts that's come across our radar screen lately is that the order book of new container vessels, about 50% or slightly more than 50% of the vessels that are on order, container vessels right now, will not fit in the new canal. That's how fast our industry is changing. Wow. And as such, we're not going to say that there's no effect, but certainly we've got to stay sharp on efficiency. We've got to keep that velocity and reliability up, and we've got to win this business back.
Fantastic. Yes. Hassan, did you want to add?
Yeah, look, right now, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, we're about 16 million containers at the port, somewhere there. by the most conservative forecast, we're going to go to, this is the port's capacity constraint forecast, to about 35 million. That's a lot of containers. And so when people say, well, we shouldn't build because Panama Canal expanding, or they're going to be a port in Mexico, et cetera. Remember the volumes we're talking about. We have issues and challenges today with 16 million. Even if we go to just 35 or to 30 or to 25, we're going to have challenges. But business like things that are predictable. So to Mike's point, I think we need to keep our eye on the ball. This is an important source of economic opportunity here in Southern California, and I am grateful to the chairman of Assembly Transportation who's talking about this. I think the public sector needs to do much more than it's doing. We look for the state to partner with us to do that. Because look, not only there is a competition from other places, but we could do things much better, much more efficient, and create more economic opportunities. And infrastructure is an answer to that.
Very good.
Yeah, I would agree with Hassan as well. All of these business threats, when added up, start to mean real business leaving the state of California. And it's not about the fight between LA and Long Beach for that last container. By and large, half of the cargo will go through LA and half goes through Long Beach. And we do things collaboratively like we've done for the last 40 years, and that's a very good approach. But realistically speaking, the third lock opening in the Panama Canal is an absolute threat. It may be an opportunity to do trade from Southern California to and from the east coast of South America, but that will not create a balance in what other effects may take place. Now, we did hear that the sills are leaking, and it could project that we push back the opening of the third lock once again. And the payment of more than $80 billion in loans is not going to take place. So these guys have got to get their game on as well. But at the same time, there's a couple of views on the Panama Canal. One is that it will give more choice to that beneficial cargo owner on how and which gateway they will ship through. The second is that with all the pressure on the Suez Canal today, the real creation of the Panama Canal led to succinct trade with the Bohai Bay area in China, or places like Xinjiang, Beijing, Dalian, Qingdao, and then on over to Korea and Japan. That's the real catchment area that plays to the Panama. And if things are done in an appropriate fashion from a deployment architecture standpoint, you'll see cargo from the Suez shift over to the Panama, not necessarily stealing it from the Pacific routed trade lanes. Yeah. But we'll be watching this very closely, and we have to stay on the business offensive to make sure we earn that discretionary cargo every day.
Fantastic. So sometimes I think that the Port of LA and Long Beach could suck the oxygen out of the room here, Kristen. What do you think? So with a staggering 1/3 of the state's economy dependent on freight movement, right, goods movement, why don't you share your thoughts from both your leadership of a National Trade Association, but as well as your leadership at Port Hueneme. What about an integrated state freight strategy and a national freight strategy? Share your thoughts, Kristen.
Happy to do so. Yeah, I think from a national perspective, and the congressman would agree with me, we need a national freight strategy. Point blank, we need one. And I was sitting on the National Freight Advisory Council, my understanding that a draft has been prepared by the U.S. Department of Transportation and is expected to be released for comment shortly. So that will be interesting to see. But in terms of a national freight strategy, we need something that's multimodal. We need something that has a dedicated, sustainable funding stream. We need something that has streamlined permitting so we can get project delivery done for our big construction projects to support our infrastructure. Wearing my AAPA hat, I just throw out some statistics that are interesting. There are 23.1 million U.S. jobs associated with the ports. There's a 4.6 trillion economic impact as a result of the ports, and that makes up 1/4 of the U.S. economy. Here in California, our ports make up about 1/3 of the economy. There is a 28.9 billion national investment needs in our ports and our connectors, our intermodal connectors. And here in Southern California, there's a 6.5 billion investment need in our ports and intermodal connectors to service the volumes expected by 2025. So certainly we this all demonstrates the need for a very integrated, robust, comprehensive, sustainable investment strategy at the national level and also here at the local level. And another point I think that's interesting to speak to at the national level is that there's so much happening, as my fellow ports here noted, in the global economy. And it seems that we are always trying to catch up as a nation rather than be ahead of the curve. You look at the demographics going on in China and the growing middle class. You look what's happening in India, and will that be the next manufacturing hub? All of this change in the energy sectors here in the US economy, how do we remain competitive with all this dynamic change in the global economy in order to be competitive? And I think we're behind the curve as a nation, and in California, we need to pay attention too.
Very good. What are some of the things for my port leaders that you're looking for? As you know, our governor just recently issued an executive order. We were developing 2 state freight strategies, one under Caltrans leadership and one under California Air Resources Board leadership, a sustainable freight strategy. Now it looks like we've got an integrated state approach to freight, at least the start of it. What would my port leaders like to see in this integrated document? Go ahead, Kristen. Jump.
First, I'll read it to you. I think that here I have the executive order, and it says we need to improve freight efficiency, transition to zero-emission technology, and increase competitiveness of the California freight system. And you look at what the ports have done, we've really led the way. Our big ports here have done significant improvements in air quality. I think 80% drop in particulate matter, 90% in SOx, 50% in NOx, and significant reductions in greenhouse gases. Same at the local level in Ventura County with our shoreside power. Over the life of our project, we're going to realize a 98% reduction in PM, huge 92% in NOx and 55% in greenhouse gases. And all this leadership and clean truck programs and everything we do, it comes at a cost. And again, as we're watching this very compelling issue where we're losing and seeing cargo diversion, we need to keep California competitive. And I think one of our concerns is that we need to really grow the economic analysis and get a budget behind it and give that the same weight that we have in terms of air quality and sort of infrastructure analysis in these sustainable freight plans. We need is a strong and robust economic analysis with a real budget behind it.
And Lucy, I have the opportunity to be on the state California Freight Advisory Council, but also this new efficiency strategies group that has been called together to take a close look at the governor's request. And it's encouraging that it is making a good attempt to balance both the efficiency, which efficiency is directly related to reduction of impact as well, and environmental benefit, but efficiency with competitiveness, along with the reduction of greenhouse gas and criteria pollutants. So around the table in that group is a fairly diverse collection of both industry and resource agency and port and other public entities. So there's a spirited dialogue. There's a lot of work being done on putting together white papers and putting together some idea of what to do there. So we're encouraged that's happening. It's going to be critically important that through that process, we keep the competitive, to the theme of your conference here today. We keep the competitive aspects at forefront, because it's going to do no good to kill that element and reduce the ability that we have of a tremendous effort by our industry partners who have really foot the bill on a large part of the environmental enhancements that have occurred so far, to not be able to do that or have the resources available.
Right. Hassan?
You know, I'm all for the goals established for us to meet greenhouse gas emissions. I would like to see this sustainable freight strategy to have 3 principles. One is there should be a balance between meeting environmental goals and meeting economic development goals. Number 2, we should always check with industries and their ability to provide what we can do, technologically speaking. I could put a goal, and it's a noble goal, and I would say I want every truck to be zero or near zero by tomorrow. But if nobody can produce this truck, what good is my goal? So let us set realistic goals that's based in economic factors that are so critical to that balance I'm talking about. At the Assembly Transportation Committee, I said, you know, we could clean up the air many different ways. One of that way is to move everybody out of the region. No human activities. Okay? We still have some emissions, but natural emissions, not humanly created. But that's not what we want. So let us be careful. One, keep the balance. Two, make sure that the industry is ready to produce what you outline. And three, invest in infrastructure. I've seen some written documents coming out. Some of it would say, we don't need to add capacity. But how are you going to be competitive in a world that's trying to compete with you so hard if you don't add capacity? Kristen talked about $5.6 billion improvement in the port. In the SCAG Regional Transportation Plan, with the help of our County Transportation Commission, the 6 of them, we have $75 billion need of infrastructure in the next 20 years. Where this is money going to come from? And if somebody is saying don't add capacity, somebody is pretty much saying don't create economic opportunities, and that's wrong. So these plans, I welcome them. I want to be, my agency has always been a part of achieving the requirement of whether it's the air quality or the greenhouse gas emission. We actually exceeded the target. But let us keep economic development, economic opportunities, lifting people up, part of the equation.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Congressman Lowenthal, your chair this year, welcome. Your chair this year of the Safe Climate Caucus.
Yes.
And could you share a little bit about that work? We love the fact that you live in Long Beach. You understand these parts. You've been part of the California legislature with great success. Your track record of balance is without parity. Would you share what's happening with Congress and hearing our experts talk about these challenges for them? What would be some ideas that you might share from your seat?
Well, I'll answer. There are many parts to that question.
I understand.
The first part of the question is
opens.
what's happening in Congress. That's the easy part, very little.
Nothing.
Now, moving on to the next part. No, a little background. First, I think this is a great discussion, and I'm not saying that we do not have our problems in California, which we do, but the discussion here is, that's another thing, is so much further advanced than the rest of the nation. That's the thing that we start. I do recall, you know, when I first started to do this, and I ran for city council 20 years ago, walked my district, talked about the dust, what it is, and when we found out that it really had to deal with the particulate matters, I was told 20 years ago, you can't be an environmentalist, this will destroy the ports. I represented the Port of Long Beach. And they said, you can't deal with this, we'll try to clean it up later on. I said, no, these can be, they're not incompatible. You can have economic development and you can protect the public health of our communities. They can go hand in hand, and the ports have done that. They took it on themselves, they have done that. They have reached equal goals, and they've said, you know, we're going to balance this and we're going to do this out here. And the loss of business did not come from the fact that they have a green port policy. Loss of business, as was described, came from other things. Yes. So we have models where it works. To get back to the Safe Climate Caucus, why I use that as an example when I took it over, because I think that is a wonderful story to share with the nation. Because really, when we're talking about the Safe Climate Caucus, which was set up a number of years ago because the Congress was not dealing with climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, policies that were really going to work, Everyone said, well, this is really important, but it's going to destroy the U.S. economy right now. We'll put it off to another day. So when I took over the caucus, which was made up of 47 members, all Democrats, I said, it's not that I'm so good, so bright, I know what to do, but I do, I can further this caucus. I said, my goal is to bring Republicans into it. This is not, we did that in California. We had bipartisan support. The nation will move forward if we have a balanced approach, if we deal with climate change, and we have we have those that are here totally committed to economic development and the economic protection. If they join us, and then we sit down. So and when I go and I spend a great deal of time, not yet totally successful, spending time with members of Congress, Republicans, and I talk about the ports. We did it here, and remember. We've worked it out. We can do this. We can invest in the future. And to me, it gets back to the question, and kind of what I do is I bring up the issue that nobody wants to bring up. Not that we're not doing the momentum in terms of having a national freight policies, and now the state is having freight policies, and I think those are wonderful. I love planning. But somebody in the Congress has to talk about how we're going to pay for all of this. Yeah. And that's what I do. I try to have a comprehensive approach that also pays for it. And I go around either through the Safe Climate Caucus or other, and say, how are we going to pay for it? So I'll give you an example. I spent time with Mr. Ryan, Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan is the chair of Ways and Means. He's going to make all the decisions about how we're going to spend the money. And I go to him and I say, Paul, look, we need a national freight policy. We have to do it, and we have to pay for it. Now, he said, I have no problem with freight policy. Mr. Schuster will tell me what to do. I said, how are we going to pay for it? What are we going to do? He says, well, I have plan A. We're going to repatriate all this money from overseas. We're going to come back. We're going to get it. I said, that's a great plan A. If that works, I'll be there, with you. But what's plan B? We need a funding strategy that builds upon the momentum of all the state freight plans that I believe has both, because I've seen when I chair transportation, that we need to not only invest in new infrastructure, but we darn well better pay for the maintenance of the existing infrastructure too. That is so critically important. So I did put out a comprehensive plan that had both built based upon the state freight plans. Everything had to come out of the freight plans, had to have both formula grants, had to have also competitive grants, had to have incentives to do zero emission kinds of projects. Not every project will be that, but there has to be some money set aside to demonstrate that we are reducing pollution. And those that benefit the most must help plan it, participate in it, the industry, but also pay for it also. And we need a user fee. And that's really what I think the best chance at this moment to move forward is to have a nationwide. When we try to do that in California, everybody said, we're going to lose the business. It's a great idea, but we're going to lose the business to the rest of the nation. I said, okay, now I'm in Washington. We're not going to lose the business to the rest of the nation because we are the nation. We need the critical issue before the Congress today is not the absence of ideas, is not the fact that both parties have some ideas about what infrastructure we need, but to have the real commitment to sit down and say, and I don't care if it's the user fee, I think that's the best way to do it, through a waiver, is for people to sit down and say, an investment in the future means you have to put some money up. As Hassan says, the public doesn't have to be all the money, but we have to have skin at the table. And I think that is what's critical. It is so frightening for people to mention the word a fee or a tax that it just gets eliminated. Well, I think that's crazy. I think that is going to be the biggest danger to the nation, that we do not have a system that we understand where we have redundancy. We're going to have, with climate change, we're going to have impacts upon bridges, we're going to have roads. If we don't have alternative ways, if we don't have ways in which we can move goods from all parts of the nation, we are out of the business of the global economy. And everybody else in the world's investing in that. We're not. It's about time that we bit the bullet and said, this is the economic driver of the nation. This will pay for itself if we can do it right, if we have the right people helping to design it, people that are most impacted, and helping to pay for it also. And so I don't call it a container fee now. I just call it a waybill user fee. I've learned, you know, I got burned on that one. Same concept. It's the user who will pay for it. But I think that the nation has to come to grips with the fact that an investment in the future means you got to put something up to invest. And I think that's the critical issue, because we know now what a comprehensive freight. There's been so much momentum going on now through the nation that we're going to lose it. And you know, and even in the national plans, which I've talked to the Secretary of Transportation and they all have great ideas. They'll say we'll work on the paying for it later. I say no. We're going to have that right up in front, because if we don't have that discussion now, it's never going to move. It's just going to be another idea put on the shelf. So that's what I think is the most important.
Thanks, Alan. Thank you. Hassan, did you want to jump in? I can tell.
I just say, first of all, thank you, Senator Lowenthal, for doing the work you do. Two things.
We're elevating you to senator.
Yeah.
We like.
I'm sorry, the Congressman.
Okay. No, let's call him senator. Let's make it more power there.
So
I did my best work in the Senate.
So, Congressman, here's a couple of things that are critical. We are a region, actually, more than any region in the country, is willing to put up 75% of the money on the table. 75% of all the money spent on infrastructure transportation in this region is generated locally by local sales tax. Now, I am all for the national bill, and we must have it, like you said, and we were visiting with you a few months ago, and we appreciate your activism in this. But I also want you to keep in mind that a national bill not returning to the source where a lot of money is generated will hurt this region and will hurt California. So I hope in your discussion of how to move forward that we pay attention to the fact that 43% of the total goods are shipped through Southern California. And somehow that need to be factored in when whatever revenues comes back to the region.
Why, in part, that's why we had, you know, I was told that you can't have formula grants. Congress doesn't like formula grants. I said, but formula grants help us to reward where we've already built the infrastructure, where we need it. We have to have formula grants, or else states like California will be badly hurt. We'll do fine in competitive grants, we always do. But who's going to pay for all the infrastructure that we already have, that we need to keep, the bridges, the roads, the connectors, first and last mile, grade separations? Those really are what we need also. And rail. And we have to have rail, and we have to have it all one multimodal approach.
Watching our time now. Thank you very much, Congressman. Thank you, Hassan. I want to hear from the private sector here. We've talked about getting to zero emissions. We've talked about climate change, greenhouse gas reduction. My very first question to John on technology is, first, tell us, with your experience in global ports, are any other global ports looking at the environmental, what I would say, I don't want to say constraints because that sounds negative, but you know what I mean when I say constraints, that our ports in California and frankly the US are looking at. So that could be just a yes or no question or a yes or no answer, but I would really love you to share, how is the private sector helping with technology advances that might help these public sector leaders succeed? No pressure.
No pressure.
It's all yours.
Well, thank you very much. I realized as we were talking that I was the only consultant actually on the panel here.
But you are the voice of everyone who is private sector in the room, which makes you incredibly powerful.
Unfortunately, I must confess that I'm from Washington, D.C., and so I'm here to help. So from a technology perspective, when we're talking about mobility at the ports, and mobility and reliability of that mobility is absolutely critical for the BCOs and the carriers because just-in-time delivery of containerized cargo to the retailers, particularly at this time of year when Christmas is coming, is absolutely critical. Technology is only one part of the equation, though. When we're talking about innovative solutions and what folks are looking at, it has to be, the optimum solution comes from the confluence of technology, process, and infrastructure all combined. And if you look at any one of them individually, you're not necessarily going to see the whole picture. And we've talked broadly about all of these different issues individually, but bringing it all together into one optimal solution involves all three. So when we look at technology, some of the things that's going on in the industry, probably the most sexy thing that's going on is sharing of information, connectivity. It's all about big data and connectivity and sharing information at what the facilities are doing, where the cargo is coming from. The carriers have a significant amount of data with regards to the cargo's point of origin, when it arrives, when it's to be delivered, but we have a mix of various other stakeholders involved that have to have access to that data in order to best match truck movements with cargo availability. And as Gene spoke earlier, a very interesting technology that's emerging is the Uber-like program that we've seen where you're matching available cargo to a pool of trucks rather than a single truck. And that creates far more efficiency within the terminal and reduces the amount of unnecessary moves. Within the facilities themselves, we see automation is becoming a big part of the equation in terms of improving productivity, and that can be a topic that can create a lot of dispute, so we won't go there necessarily. But in terms of actually optimizing the pre-staging of cargo to trucks, automation gives you that ability and reduces the number of unnecessary moves. And so that's a big part. Worldwide, you asked the question with regards to some of the greenhouse gas issues and the environmental issues. It's far less of a focus. There's no doubt, no question about that.
From the private sector, is that a competitive disadvantage then for us to focus here, or do you think, in your experience, that other ports will end up following us?
No, so let me clarify on that.
Yes.
So from a public policy perspective,
yes,
on the environmental issues, internationally you'll see less focus on that.
Correct.
But from a private sector perspective, the image and the responsibility that those companies project to their broad base of customers, environmental policy and improving the environment is of high importance.
Excellent, excellent, very good, very good. Well, I've got you still talking. I'm going to throw a curveball at you.
Okay.
One of the big issues that the Orange County Business Council is looking at that transcends industry clusters is cybersecurity. Can you share a little bit about the issues? The saying goes that you're either being hacked or you're being hacked and you don't even know you're being hacked. I mean, basically, you're in one of those two modes right now. How does that, from your technology vantage point, the private sector vantage point, how is that? How are you looking at that from ports and port security?
Well, that's something that is obviously very topical lately with the news with one of the more interesting websites. But let's face it, the amount of data that's out there that's required in order to optimize the system is huge. And its use can help move cargo faster and improve the overall utilization of our roads and our rails and improve safety at the same time and optimize the available conveyances that are there. Unfortunately, sharing that data and aggregating it in one place is an important part of that equation. And there's a couple of issues associated with that. One is there's competitiveness issue. It's proprietary information. Carriers don't necessarily want to put all of that information out there because then they look at other carriers looking to look at customers to potentially steal and all that. So that's an important part of the equation too. And clearly then the cybersecurity, the security of the data itself is an enormous problem. I'm not an expert in that at all. You'd have to ask my son. He's top secret security clearance at the Pentagon, so he would be able to tell me.
I thought you were going to tell me he was 12 years old. And he could help us with our apps later.
Yeah. But I honestly, with all the stuff you hear in the news, I don't think we're anywhere close there yet with regards to security of data in order to make people feel very comfortable with sharing it and aggregating it in one place.
Very good.
I don't think we're very close to it at all.
Thank you. Hassan, do you have some technology?
Well, I just want to say, being a board member of Mobility 21, I want to thank Jenny, where is Jenny, and Kristen. Raise your hand. Thank you for a great conference today.
Great.
The only thing I would say, obviously cyber security is important, but sometimes when we talk about technology advancing so much, we talk about driverless cars. People say, oh my God, can you imagine, God forbid, if the system shuts down. Look, progress would require us to take risks. This is a big risk, but a calculated risk is always worth taking. Mm-hmm. And in these kind of things, if technology is going to make us more competitive, is going to move us forward, create economic opportunities, I believe it's a risk worth taking. Yes, there is a risk, but we have to move forward and take advantage of the technologies.
Very good.
And the opportunity lies right in front of us. The Port of Los Angeles has the only port cybersecurity center in the nation, in part by federal and state funds that helped us kick it off last September of 2014. And I, too, am not an expert in this area, John, but it can go through, as my experts tell me, 47 million permutations of potential threat in both code and satellite every minute.
Exactly.
So that hopefully is something that we can use to replicate a best practice throughout our country.
Fantastic. Very, very good. So we're at the witching hour here, standing between these folks and either the bar or their Twilight tickets to Disney. So, and I always like to do value added for the private sector folks that are in the room. So if each of you would like to give us a little bit of your closing thoughts, but include in that, where is private sector business opportunities within your realm that my folks here need to chat with you or your folks about? Kristen, start with you.
From a private sector perspective?
Yeah, where's the new business coming out of Port Hueneme for my folks in the room that they should be aware of?
Oh, I gotcha. I was a little slow. Okay. We are in the midst of rolling out our strategic 2020 plan, and we are looking at, as probably all the ports are, how we react and respond to what's happening in the global marketplace and the prudent investments that we need to make in our infrastructure. And we're looking at potentially as much as $67 million in investment in our port to remain competitive in the future. So we will be going and moving forward with a lot of construction projects. One that we know we're going to be moving ahead with is we are going to be deepening our port from 35 feet of water to 40 feet of water. So there'll be construction bids out for that, engineering bids out for that. Associated with that is that we're going to need to improve our infrastructure and our docks so they have the structural integrity to hold that deeper water. So we'll be putting out bids and environmental specs for that. We're moving forward a lot of energy projects, a lot of environmental projects. We post everything on Planet Bids, and we encourage a very open, transparent process and hope that you would bid and participate in improving our infrastructure.
Fantastic. John, do you have any closing thoughts? Any partnerships with Parsons to share?
Sure. What I would say is that just in general, the private sector is very, very interested in making investments in infrastructure, transportation systems, and obviously the technology to support that as well. We're seeing it all over the place. Public-private partnerships is a big part of what the overall national infrastructure strategy is going to need to be. And we've seen it all over the world. Europe has seen significant investments in infrastructure from the private sector. Over in other parts of the world, that is the mode in which infrastructure is developed. So it is something that can work here in the United States, provided that the policies are set to enable it. However, that said, Congressman pointed out and made a very good point. A user fee is an important part of the equation. There must be a return on investment, otherwise there won't be any investment. So everybody that is using the system would have to get used to the idea of making a contribution to that operating cost and capital to realize the benefit of that system. So I'm all for it, and I think we're going to see a significant amount of private investment in the infrastructure going forward at this point.
Michael.
Well, I think as in the Port of Long Beach, we're in the midst of about a $4.5 billion capital program, and probably about a couple dozen of those of you in the room have got a little piece of that program right now, and that will continue. You know, the infrastructure investments in the ports in San Pedro Bay will be substantial. There are a couple other areas, though, that are of interest. I think, as both Gene and John had mentioned, there's going to be great opportunities coming to entrepreneurs in information, and whether it be a Cargomatic Uber-type system or a Quick 180 or any one of a number of others, there'll be great opportunities to optimize the supply chain through information and putting information together. And then one last thought on Port of Long Beach. We're embarking on you know, as we electrify terminals, as we move into the next stage, we're taking a very hard look at the grid. And we announced earlier this year a program called Energy Island, which is in its infancy, but as it develops, there's going to be tremendous opportunity all across the spectrum to help us develop not only sustainable, but reliable, high-quality electrical energy that will power these ports. Because, you know, we can do all we need to make our ports efficient, but if all you have to do to take them down is pull the plug out, then that's a problem. So we're going to address that one aggressively over the years to come. There'll be great opportunity in that area as well.
Awesome, thank you. Gene, where's the new business?
What we tried to indoctrinate at the Port of LA was the heightened awareness of the P3 relationship. And in our area, we're looking at three main segments: real estate. Southern California, less than 1% availability, I think, of commercial real estate right now at this moment. So as we look at bigger ships and repurposing land at the port, the work that we need to do with our partners in the Inland Empire, as an example, is going to be huge coming up in the not too distant future. Secondly, process management. Today we have 13 terminals in San Pedro Bay's port complex, represented by 11 different companies using 9 unique operating systems. How we can better drive efficiencies through process management is also going to be key from that private entity aspect. And lastly, technology, as has been touched on by each one of the panelists, in bringing folks together, whether it be through direct equity investment or simply access to one of the nation's great assets, we think it'd be important. And overlaid with those three segments, as everyone has agreed upon this afternoon, the development of infrastructure that will be allowing us to make decisions for the next generation of leadership in the legislature, as well as business and public service, and that which we have today, which needs to be maintained at the highest level.
Excellent, thank you. Senator, Congressman.
Council member.
Council member, fearless leader.
And faculty member.
And faculty member.
Well, I think we're all talking about wanting an efficient, stable, reliable system with cost containment to be able to move goods. Question is, how do we get there? And I think what we've learned is when we went to containerization those years, it radically changed the way we did, and it made Long Beach, Los Angeles a major center. And remember, prior to that, before containerization, it really was up in the Oakland. So those that moved to grab hold of the changes in the industry were the ones that benefited. And I think what Gene has mentioned is that the industry is changing again today. There is a consolidation taking place. There is a size, and the private sector is driving that. And I think the public sector is going to have to respond to that and to have the ability to deal with that, which is being driven by that. I also think that the final thing is that the private sector and the public sector is going to have to take into account is that climate change is not an abstraction. We are going to have, within the next 80 years, anywhere from on the West Coast, 2 to 7 feet of sea level rise. Do you know what that's going to do to our infrastructure that we're not even funding today? We're going to need entirely new infrastructure. So unless we're prepared to keep replacing it, we have to deal with what we can do to deal with climate change up front, or else that is going to drive the costs prohibitively in the future.
Thank you, sir. Hassan, you have the last word.
Thank you. So somebody mentioned that people need to keep in mind that somebody is going to have to pay for this. Absolutely. And the consumer will end up paying for it one way or another. Now, it is much easier, especially for the congressman, it's much easier to convince people to pay for it if we see tangible linkage between what we're paying for and what we're going to do. In this region, 5 of our counties pass a sales tax with about 70% of the votes. Getting 70% on anything, that means you're getting almost 95% because some people will vote no regardless. So we can find the linkages. I will share with you, one time I was giving a presentation here in Orange County, and a nice lady stood up and she was really angry at me, and she said, "Why do you always talk about us paying taxes? Let the government pay for it." Well, I didn't even have the heart to tell her where does the government get its money. So I do think public-private partnership is important. I do think what we're trying to do in Sacramento today, and hopefully nationally, is to provide some seed money to encourage that public-private. It does work. It worked here in this region. We did Colton Crossings with a good partnership. We can do bigger projects, and I hope this region will change our opinion of how badly we're failing in public-private. We have to change that, and I hope that's the future.
Very good. Thank you. Well, there is no conversation about freight without our favorite California Transportation Commissioner, Fran Inman. So I wanted you to know that at all times I was looking at this picture because Fran, I don't know if you can see it in the light, but Fran has been right here with these flowers the whole time as our freight goddess. And so no one does better to advocate for our region, for the state, for the nation than Fran Inman. And these panelists, haven't they been terrific? Would you welcome and thank them for a terrific discussion. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you. Great. I think we're good. And Jenny, what else do we need now? We're done. Okay. Kate, you're on.
That was a fascinating discussion. We were all wrapped back there, backstage, listening. I mean, we've talked about mobility and goods movement and flood rise and cybersecurity. That was a session chock full of information, and you got tips on where the new projects are coming from. So well worth your staying, I know. Thanks for that editorial comment, Hassan. We'd like to thank our speakers and our panelists for the amazing takeaways. A very big thank you to Lucy Dunn, Congressman Lowenthal, our port CEOs, Skaggs and Parsons, for your valuable insights. Please give a big round of applause to our speakers.